All right, so today I want to talk about the Konica Hexanon 40mm f1.8. Today, this is probably one of the most, if not the most well-known Konica Hexanon lens because it has become very popular with the mirrorless crowd due to its focal length and fast maximum aperture. And I want to talk a little bit about that, why that might be the case. So, some background basics. The Hexanon 40mm f1.8 was introduced with the FS1 camera. The FS1 was Konica's first, was the first 35mm camera with built-in motorized film advance. That was its claim to fame. And Konica was hoping to reinvigorate sales, and because they were kind of they were slipping by the late 70s. And they sold a lot of these things, but not enough to reinvigorate the company. At any rate, so that was when the lens was introduced in 1979. The lens was discontinued. I'm not sure exactly when. Web resources indicate somewhere between 83 and 87. 87 is when the Konica stopped manufacturing SLRs and just got out of the camera business. They were unable to compete, and that was it. So I'm tempted to think that production of this lens probably extended closer to 87 than 83 because there's so many of these things made and they're so easy to find and inexpensive nowadays. That I'm tempted to think the production run was more than 4 years. But I don't know that for a fact. There was only one version, and there's one web resource I found which claims that it was manufactured by Konica. Can't confirm that. It's certainly possible. Recall that the Hexar budget lens line, Konica had two lens lines. The Hexanons were their main line, their number one line. But they did have a budget line called Hexar, and the Hexar lenses were made by a third-party manufacturer, possibly Konica. So is it possible that this lens was made by Konica? In the late 1970s, Konica was cutting corners to save money. Might they have outsourced production to a third-party manufacturer? Yeah, sure, it's possible. Can't confirm it, don't know for sure. The aperture range on this lens goes from f1.8 to f22. This was one of the first, if not the first, Hexanon lenses to have an aperture to close down to f22. Prior to that, Hexanon lenses only closed down to f16 because the auto exposure system in the auto reflex cameras was incapable of controlling aperture smaller than f16. So they stopped them. So they didn't bother to make an extra. To close the lenses down any farther than that up until the late 70s. And I think this may have been, well, it was one of the first, if not the first, Hexanon lenses to close down to f22. Optical construction, 6 elements in 5 groups, 55mm filter thread, 27mm length, weight 140 grams. You can see it is called a pancake lens. It's called a pancake. Lenses of this type are called pancakes because they're narrow, and lightweight, and 27mm length. That is length from the lens mount to the filter ring and infinity. Weight over 140 grams. And this lens's claim to fame is that it is often referred to as one of the sharpest lenses ever made by anyone. That is not newfangled hipster lore. That is old-fashioned boomer lore, which we all know is far more reliable. But no, seriously, this lens, along with the 50mm f1.7 Hexanon, are the two Hexanon lenses regularly referred to in the literature and predating the internet, the pre-internet literature, as some of the sharpest lenses ever made by anyone. So that is this lens's claim to fame, is corner-to-corner sharpness and high contrast just across the field. And that's what this lens is known for. And my own experience confirms that. I will put a link down below to my Flickr album where I have images taken with this lens, all shot on film, including, and you can see the sharpness for yourself. You can blow them up and take a look at that. But there was a small set of images I took, maybe half a dozen or so, at a modeling workshop where I just opened this thing up to f1.8 and used it as, or tried to use it as a portrait lens with halfway decent results. I was shooting the young woman out on a sort of a confined outdoor courtyard, and so it was appropriate for the circumstances in low light. I think I was shooting HP5 and pushing it one stop to 800. And the results weren't bad. I wouldn't call this thing a bokeh monster by any stretch of the imagination. But the out of focus results, it was sharp at one, it was certainly centrally sharp at f1.8, and the out of focus areas weren't bad. I mean, if you need to shoot portraits in a confined space under low light, I mean, I wouldn't hesitate. So have a look at those, and I want to go back to the issue of why this thing is so popular nowadays. I mean, the mirrorless crowd is just, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs over this lens. They absolutely love it, and understandably so. I mean, if you're shooting a crop sensor camera, the focal length is certainly appealing. The maximum aperture is certainly appealing. It's a nice fast aperture for a lens of this type back in the manual focus days. I mean, let me think about this. Go 5 millimeters wider to 35 millimeters. How many 35 millimeter f1.8 lenses can you think of that are this small, this light, and this inexpensive? None. Zero come to mind. None. Not one that I can think of. I can't think of a single super fast, and that would be considered a super fast 35 millimeter, at least back in the manual focus days, certainly would have been. And I can't think of anything that competes with this in terms of size, form factor, and certainly availability nowadays. Nothing comes to mind. So that's kind of my point. Is I think the reason this lens is popular is because there just aren't a whole lot of other alternatives if you're going to go back to the manual focus era. So let's take a look at what was available back then. Now, I can't claim that I'm a pancake collector, but I've done a little bit of homework, and I want to share this with you. If I've missed anything, if I've omitted something significant, please do leave a comment. I do not claim to be an expert on pancake lenses, but I think I did enough homework to do a reasonably decent review of what was available and what is available today in terms of the competition vis-a-vis the Hexanon 40-1.8, and the answer is not a whole lot. So I got the Hexanon 40-1.8, 27 millimeters, that's a length, 140 grams weight. The most famous pancake lens of the manual focus era is probably the Nikon Series E 51.8. And I didn't know this until I looked it up, but on the photosynthesis website, which is sort of the definitive, authoritative Nikkor collector guide online, it indicates that the early version was 24 millimeters, late version 27.5. Early version 135 grams, late version 155 grams. There was an early version of the Series E which was considered aesthetically lacking, and it was modified at some point to make it look more like the Nikkors, and I did not know that also involved a increase in size. Nikon also made a 45 millimeter f2.8 lens. This was introduced, I think, with the FM3A. And it's a collector piece. There weren't very many made, and I think its claim to fame is it's the only Nikkor lens with a Tessar optical formula. If you know more than I do about that, please leave a comment. But it was low production, and it was made as a collector piece, and it's basically a collector piece nowadays. They're not easy to find, and they're not cheap when you do find them. 17 millimeter, although they're certainly pancakes. 17 millimeter length, 120 grams weight. This was preceded by, in the, I think the pre-AI days even, the 45 millimeter f2.8 guide number lens, which had a mechanism which locked the aperture ring and the focus ring in such a manner that if you set the guide number to your big strobe flash, which then you could vary your distance to subject without having to recalculate. It's that particular lens is of collector interest only, I think, or of historical interest only to nerdy collectors like me, though I am in no rush to get one, personally. Pentax made a pancake. I'm not sure how common this is, but the Pentax forum site indicates that there was in the M series, the SMC M series, which is from the K-mount, a 40 millimeter f2.8 Pentax pancake, 18 millimeter length, 110 grams. That's certainly, that qualifies as a pancake for sure. I don't know how common this lens is. I don't know how frequently they come up for sale, and I'm not sure what they go for when they are found. And I don't know how well they're considered. I read a few of the entries on the Pentax forums, user contributions, and it appeared to get mixed reviews. But again, those are just random comments by random people. So I'm not sure how authoritative that should be considered. And again, I don't know how common these are. I don't remember seeing these things come up for sale all that often. Not that I'm much of a K-mount collector. If you know much about this lens, please do leave a comment. I also saw some information about an Olympus OM Zuiko 40mm f2, which was listed as uncommon. The web resources that I found listing this lens or indicating this lens indicated that it was uncommon. So apparently this was a low production lens. Given the popularity of and the high quality of the OM Zuiko line, I suspect that this is probably highly sought after by collectors and priced accordingly. And that would be my suspicion. Although at 40 millimeters with an f2 maximum aperture, this would probably be the closest competition in terms of specs to the Hexanon. Length of 25 millimeters, weight of 140 grams. So this is, in terms of the specs, this would be the closest. But the web resources I found indicated that it's fairly rare. The last but not least is the only true competition in terms of specs and availability and price, and that would be the Minolta Rocore 45mm f2 with the length of 30.5 millimeters and a weight of 125 grams. I owned one of these lenses back in the day, and it's certainly a pancake. These numbers look right to me. And again, the numbers I'm reading off, that's just what I found online. I can't swear to their accuracy. The Nikon stuff comes from the photosynthesis site, which I do believe to be authoritative. The other stuff, it's just what I found. Now, I can tell you that I have owned one of these before, and these numbers, they sound about right. But in terms of specs and availability and pricing, this is really the only competition. The other lenses that I've listed here, I mean, the Series E is fairly easily available, but at a 50 millimeter focal length, I mean, the reason these things are popular is one of the reasons is the focal length. Is that it's a little bit wider than 50 millimeter. I think it has a lot of appeal because of that. And the only real competition here would be the Rocore, which is again 45 millimeters, so it's halfway between this and a 50. And f2 is that a half a stop or a third of a stop difference from f1.8? I'm not sure. If you know, leave a comment. F1.8 is this half a stop or a third of a stop difference? I'm not sure. Anyway, so the Minolta Rocore does not have the same. I mean, it's less appealing in terms of its specs. Although it is inexpensive and not too hard to find. So I think that's really what accounts for the popularity of this lens, is that it really has very little competition. In terms of the specs, the only real competition would be the Olympus lens, which is fairly rare. The Minolta is close, although the Hexanon has better specs. The Hexanon's a little bit wider, a little bit faster. And in terms of availability and price, it's probably comparable with the Rocore. So I'm guessing that's probably why this thing has been has really become wildly popular with the mirrorless crowd. It makes sense to me. So there you have it. Pancake lens. Let's see, what does a pancake lens look like on a full size, built like a tank, auto reflex? When you put it on one of these, you can see why it's called a pancake. I mean, it looks mismatched. It really looks mismatched on these on the full size built like a tank camera. That's 40 millimeter f1.8 pancake. All right, I hope you found this video helpful, informative, amusing, or a combination thereof. If so, please do like and subscribe, and as always, check out the links down below. Thanks now. Take care. Bye-bye.